Welcome back to Leading Blind in episode 2 of my recap series on my home D&D campaign dubbed the Strix. See episode 1 if you aren't caught up to what's going on and more or less how we're playing. It's a little complicated. A few things everyone needs to know before we move on. At the end of the last session, the Strix adventurers were looting the mimics that had just been defeated in the middle of the college main biblioplex, and they discovered a small collection of unusual coins stamped on one side with the head of a dragon and a nine-tailed kitsune on the other. If these should be brought up again in the campaign, as it just so happens they weren't during this session, they have been dubbed kit coins by the DM in the group. Secondly, if you're looking for action this session, you might want to come back another time. This session was 9 hours long, and with one small exception, entirely roleplay based, because my brother-in-law and I agreed we really wanted to try and get more into our characters' heads and figure out who they were a little bit better. We didn't anticipate this much aimless RP happening, but it was fun, and I'm sure we will be getting to some fighting in the next session based on the fact that the DM had a map ready and waiting the whole time that we just never got to. Lastly, although this probably isn't vitally important, Keithar will barely have any presence in this session. In spite of being at all the group conversations, I was intensely interested in managing to sculpt my half-drow character a little bit better, Opani. So I handed the character sheet and the character basically over to my husband to play as a DMPC or just an NPC for most of it. I did cut in, and he did ask for the player agency involved with that character a lot, but I just really wanted to concentrate on Opani since I feel like I already knew Keithar really well, and so, yeah. Keithar was played by me when it was important, but when it wasn't, and he was just throwing casual conversation out there, my husband, the DM, was taking over, and it worked out pretty damn good. Session 2 of the Strix starts a short time jump after the battle with the mimics and the little looting session. It's implied that they basically had to hang around for a while people were interviewed by more officious and on-duty security than Keithar. Afterwards, the two women of the group offered to take little Jiri for ice cream because she had held her own so well through the course of the day, and everyone ends up traveling to the outskirts of the main campus to the Dark Pumpkin Inn. During their ice cream, Opani brings the conversation back to their little tea party outside of the biblioplex and asks Kita exactly what she meant when she said she was interested in power, and it comes to light that her idea of power is extremely specific. Her father is the king of Atlantis, and she wants his throne, and she fully intends to murder all of her siblings to do this. Everybody at the table is flummoxed by this blatant admission, especially Opani and Keithar, although Gawain doesn't actually seem surprised at all. He just kind of takes it like a brick wall, almost as if he knew something. When Kita realizes she's being gawked at, she defends herself, saying, "Look, if my sisters were here at this table, they would admit the same exact thing. They all intend to kill me and each other too. This is survival of the fittest." Opani takes her at her word, but Keithar makes a mental note to maybe look at her student file if he gets a chance, just to make sure he's not dealing with a complete psychopath, because, he wants to keep his little sister safe. Because Kita is talking about her father and his position, it comes to light that her kingdom is extremely wealthy, like beyond obscenely wealthy, and Kita has never had to think or worry about money in her entire life, which only further highlights how Gawain, sitting next to her, is wearing older, shabbier armor and wearing a shabbier, very obviously well-used weapon. So Opani ends up gently acknowledging this to him, and tells him that her father is a well-known, or at least semi-well-known cleric adventurer named Strux Witchhammer. He's actually heard of the name. She tells him that because adventurers do tend to loot or get rewards for the things they do, her father has an entire room, she doesn't say how big or small it is, of armor and weapons that he doesn't really have the need to use. But he doesn't tend to just give it away either, because if it was gifted to him, he would feel he was insulting the people who offered it to him. In order to try and make friends with Gawain and make him feel less out of place, she says maybe she can write to her father and ask him to surrender one of his unused weapons to replace the old one at Gawain's hip. He says he's not interested in any other armor, and quite frankly, none of Strux's armor would fit Gawain anyway, since they are such different sizes. He says he would appreciate and never say no to a gift of a new weapon. During the second sit-down, the group end up talking minimally about their faiths. Keithar doesn't have much information to offer up about faith at the time, but Opani states that she's a cleric of Aelith. Gawain recognizes the name tangentially, but that's it. Nobody else knows who that is. So Opani explains to the group that they aren't exactly an actual full-blown deity. Aelith is a patron saint of lost causes, a neutral, gender-fluid entity who she's very recently turned to. Gawain claims to have faith, but he doesn't seem to be following a specific religion or god. He says he follows the Fallen. Opani, as a cleric, recognizes this title as a memoriam that is dedicated to fallen warriors. Keithar, since he's been in the college for a while as a security guard, tells Gawain there is a memorial for the fallen on campus, but Gawain shouldn't expect to find any familiar names in it. Rather, like our modern real-world memorials for Korean or Civil War or Vietnam vets who have fallen in battle, these memoriams are geographically important, so people who come from the area of Strixhaven would be on this wall, not people who Gawain might have fought with. Towards the end of having their ice cream and conversation, everyone kind of turns to little Jiri for a few moments to again congratulate her on holding herself so well during the mimic battle and being of such assistance during the riddles and scavenger hunt that took place beforehand. It's very clear that Gawain and Kida are very gung-ho for Jiri to stick around, and Opani certainly wouldn't mind. Keithar, however, is a little more reticent about deliberately having his baby sister be a part of an adventuring party made up of college kids, which is kind of understandable, and since he claims he has to work that night and then go to classes the following day, he excuses himself to make sure he gets his little sister home. As he's leaving, they all take note of the fact that they apparently are expected to continue seeing each other while they're at Strixhaven as a group, so they agree to meet up after classes back at the Biblioplex again, and then maybe go hang out even more afterwards and kind of really unwind, like actual college students who are actually away from home, possibly for the first times in their lives, although that doesn't seem likely with Gawain. He's just very happy to go along for that ride. The group leaves the ice cream parlor and take various little transportation circles to their individual college districts. Kida, upon returning to her dorm in Prismari, encounters a second year named Nora with short black hair and blue eyes. The two of them almost instantly have a very casual and friendly contest of what they can do with magic, such as mage hand and dancing lights, with various effects depending on their separate skills. While they play around with this, Kida tells Nora about the scavenger hunt and mimic attack, and is instantly countered with how much better she had it, since Nora only got to sit in a lecture hall answering trivia questions all day for her mandatory fun. Through the entire conversation, Kida is utterly clueless that Nora has been openly flirting with her, but they still end up agreeing to have breakfast together the next morning. Clearly, Kida is somewhat desperate for friends and happy to have made another one so fast. Since they're both in Witherbloom, Gawain and Opani end up taking the same portal to their particular school district. He does not acknowledge that it's what he's doing, but Gowan escorts Opani well beyond where he knows his own dorm to be in order to see that she gets to her room safely. During the walk, they end up meandering through a few different threads of conversation that are tangentially linked to each other. They talk about how Gowan has been in many battles and wars all over without feeling comfortable enough to disclose which battles and wars. Through her gentle prodding, he says that he's lost many friends, and because of this, Opani ends up bringing clerics during the war and asks him if he's ever seen somebody brought back from the dead. Not taken up from unconsciousness where they're making technical death saving throws according to the game, but if he's ever seen somebody who's been dead for a while, like more than a couple of hours, brought back. Gowan tells her that no, he hasn't seen anything like that. She then asks if he's ever seen somebody obliterated, being very careful to use that word. He says yes, thinking he understands what she means, but her questions make him look at her more directly in examination, as if he thinks he's starting to understand her more. At her door, they say goodnight, and he goes on to back all the way to his own dorm room. Once she's been in her dorm for a little bit, Opani gets a little restless, so she decides to brush out all her customary braids so that her hair falls loosely around her shoulders and down her back, gets changed into a velveteen sheath dress with long sleeves, and goes out to find a club. She sits with a glass of wine in a beautiful nightclub called the Nostalgic Cavern Tavern that is literally a bar in a cave with the kind of low lighting and jazz music that she was hoping to find. I was looking for something specific and thought I had been pretty clear with my DM, but I rolled pretty damn poorly. So he only told me a couple of people Opani noticed at the club. One of them was an owlin with white feathers speckled with black. So basically a snowy owl who seemed to be anxiously fidgeting with the glass in front of them at the bar. Opani was absolutely not interested in approaching a stranger in order to be concerned, so she ended up just walking out of the bar in frustration. Since I was rolling so poorly and clearly there had been just some kind of innocent miscommunication, I let Opani do something that had an in-character reason, but also kind of fell out of the blue since I had been playing her so timidly up to this point. All of a sudden, as she's leaving the bar, she decides all alone that she wanted to pick a fight. Not some sort of deathmatch fight, but she wanted to start some shit. In the course of doing this, I told the DM what Opani wanted, and he scrambled to create a character and ended up randomly picking through some generator a commoner for her to bump into. She shoulder checks this poor little genderless looking dude with long red hair and then demands if he's going to say sorry. The dude's taken aback and a little scared since I had to roll an intimidation check, and of course this is where I did good. And he stutteringly tells her no. This character, by the way, although it's not vastly important, was dubbed Griffin by my sister-in-law who was sitting at the table with us. So, was a little intimidated, said no, and since it wasn't the confrontation she was looking for, Opani sent a random piece of magic that she didn't even know where it came from or what it was exactly at this poor dude. Basically just tending to slap him into a confrontation. But this turned out to be Mind Sliver, and of course, I rolled way too well for an NPC that was nowhere near ready for that kind of confrontation. I dropped this character dead with 6 hit points. They had less than 6 hit points, and they dropped like a stone to the ground, apparently bleeding from the nostrils due to the psychic damage Opani caused. This freaks her out, and it knocks her clean out of her aggressive situation and mood. She frantically uses Cure Wounds, giving him 10 hit points, which technically, obviously, he couldn't even take, but fully brings him back to life and full health. She apologizes frantically as Griffin wakes up a little scared and confused, and he just scrambles away in a panic. Completely in shock over what she's just done will provoke a little bit of a hissy, scratchy cat fight, Opani hurries home and locks herself in her dorm, wanting nothing else to do with that bullshit "what the fuck did I just do, where the hell did that come from" nonsense. While Opani was out, Gawain also decided to go out, but he was out in search of the memoriam for the fallen. He does find it in his district and spends a little time there just kind of meditating and looking over the names, but as Kethar had warned him, he didn't see anybody he recognized, and he does eventually just return to his dorm for the night. Back at their place, Kethar and Jiri spoke briefly about how much fun Jiri had during the day and how proud he was of her for her actions during the mimic fight and during the scavenger hunt. And he tells her just how proud their mothers would be of her. He also asks her if she misses them. Little Jiri, in typical 6-year-old fashion, when all of a sudden you feel like you're going to emotionally lock down, is relatively ambivalent during this conversation, except for looking very, very forward to seeing his group in action again and fighting alongside him, which he's not too enthused for. The following morning, Kita has a breakfast with Nora. Kita tells Nora that she's interested in living with her new adventuring party because she's made fast friends with them, and it doesn't make sense for people she's supposed to hang out with a ton to be living on completely different parts of the campus. Nora says it isn't very common and it's likely exorbitantly expensive, but she can petition any of the deans of the college for a party house, especially since her and her group are all in the same year. Without realizing how this comes across, Kita asks Nora if she'd be interested in moving into the party house with them should this occur, and since she's so eager to have her friends and have them all together, the DM ended up asking Kita to roll a persuasion roll, and my brother-in-law rolled a 27. So Nora says she wouldn't necessarily refuse the invitation if it was given, but they'd have to actually get the house first. Nothing else really happens during the day after that, and Kita goes on to her classes. Everyone has classes that day. During a fighting class, Gawain almost has a chance to encounter Griffin, the red-headed young man that Opani accidentally murked the night before, but instead ends up selecting a different partner for the day, Grayson. Grayson has slicked back dark brown hair and wears medals from the Wildemere military. Gawain uses this as a point of connection between them in order to learn some new maneuvers from the gentleman for the next hour or so. It turns out that Gawain and Opani have 2 classes together, and Opani and Kita have 1 class together. Opani and Gawain have both the balance of the arcane arts and the history of divine and arcane arts, while Kita and Opani share the curriculum of chaos itself. During the curriculum of chaos, Opana ends up blurting out her entire mistake to Kita, who she understands to be a bit more morally gray and may have some supportive words for her to advise her on what to do next. At first, Kita thinks that maybe Opani says she made a mistake in regards to sleeping with the wrong guy or something, and then asking if she slept with the wrong girl, and when Opani goes, "if only," this is when Kita realizes that Opani prefers women. When she finds out the real reason her friend is riddled with guilt, though, Kita completely surprises Opani by asking her why she bothered to bring her victim back. She says that if she'd just walked away, there was no proof that Opani was the one to attack them. She didn't want to leave them there to their death just because she felt irrationally pissy and had picked a fight. She hadn't meant to cast the spell she had because she'd never used that spell before and had no real idea where it had come from. It scared the shit out of her. Kita further advises that she has no reason to be afraid of what she can do or her power. She comes close to outright frightening Opani with her very strong encouragement to just take ownership of her power and not be afraid of using her destructive spells to achieve her ends. At least, that's the advice as Opani understands it. While they're having this discussion, Opani is further freaked out by an intense heat that starts at the small of her back on the right side. And suddenly a voice she recognizes seeps into her mind. It seems to react to Kita's words as if it's a sentient soul, and it says to her, "She's right, magic is power, but power is not everything, and you have yet to see true power." Opani doesn't tell Kito about this voice, and Kita doesn't even react to how she stiffens or looks around in sudden shock. She wonders if the voice can be real, or if it was a warning or a reassurance. She has no clue. She's too afraid to say anything about it. When the Chaos Curriculum class ends, it is their last class of the day, so they walk together out onto the campus. Opani follows Kita to the office of the Dean of Prismari, and there, Kita speaks to the secretary to put in her inquiry towards a party house. She's very flippant that she's not worried about paying for the place, and learns that all party members must consent to living in the same house before it would even be permitted, regardless of the fee being paid. Again, Kita says she'll write to her father asking for the money, and she's pretty certain of herself that she can get everyone agreed to the arrangement. After this, Opani stops at the post office on the way to the main biblioplex to send a message to her father. She tells him about her new friend Gawain and how he could use a new blade, and also asks him to please remember to send her any diamonds that he may loot or be gifted that may prove of worth to her and her goals at the academy. At this point, the group gets together without Jiri. Keithar is looking forward to a night out with the adults. They all meet outside the biblioplex, and Gawain treats the group to coffee, as they'd previously agreed that whoever arrived first would be in charge of getting it for the group. Gawain, not one to complain about the money he's wary of spending, doesn't bring this up, but the group does make a point to remind him he could have just collected money from them as they arrived before going in to get the drinks by himself. They just weren't interested in clustering as a group in the dinky cafe. For the first time, Kita brings up the concept of a party house to the group where they can all stay, assuring them that she'll pay for the location with her own funds from her father's treasury. Opani is willing enough just because she doesn't really have a preference. Gawain is also agreeable since it means having to worry less about his own funds. He's also just easygoing when it comes to playing along with those kinds of schemes, but Keithar is a little bit more reticent. He insists he's going to need time to get to know them and think about the option for himself and his little sister. He even gets just a little bit annoyed when no one understands he's trying to be a protective big brother. They discuss what to do for the evening and decide to go out to a bar in the Witherbloom district called the 12th Hag, which turns out to be this enormous tree in the middle of a swampy, boggy area. It has 2 tiers of decks outside and a long dock that goes into the swamp. There are boats on either side of the dock attached that are turned into like little private booths all their own, and it's really cool aesthetic. They are seated and served by a really cool steampunk type construct named Axel. And Opani pretty quickly gets over her original reticence of going to a place called 12th Hag because her father's warned her about creatures like that. At the bar, they all order food and drinks. Keithar, Kita, and Opani are taking up parts of the bill because they don't mind helping out Gawain, since even though he hasn't said anything, they're not dummies and can tell he's trying not to spend money. Mostly, though, he just kind of agrees to pick off all the appetizers that the others buy for themselves. The only thing he accepts is when Keithar offers to buy him drinks as a way to pay him back for the coffee. Kita purchases a unique drink more inspired by where she's from in Atlantis and gives Opani a taste. It's a spicy, sour, sweet concoction that Opani cannot pronounce, and it's definitely not to her normal taste as it turns out. In return, she gives Kita a taste of her own wine, which is a dark raspberry grape-like drink made from the Underdark. Keithar and Gawain each get an ale and mead, respectively. Eventually, Opani snatches Keithar's pint and takes a swig, and he's just a little too slow to stop her impulsive action, but he only laughs it off without taking any real offense. Opani and Kita also end up testing each other with new flavors. Opani orders cinnamon bites since Kita says she's never had it in her entire life. Kita orders something with a totally different kind of spice, again, not really mentioned what, but it's exotic. Both times, along with when they're trying new drinks, all the characters have to roll for constitution checks. As spicy as Kita's selection was meant to be for food, I ended up rolling as Opani a nat 20 for her constitution check, so she took that spice like a champ, but she did pass it back to Kita, stating it was going to hurt later. During the course of the night, the group unlocks the tiniest bits of Kethar's background when they take note of how he launched himself into the battle with the mimics. He explains to them that yes, he has a background in fighting, but he chose to leave it behind because it just wasn't for him in the long run. He's come to school to learn about archaeology, but it's not exactly his forte. He isn't particularly smart, it's just a topic that interests him. He's interested in learning something that takes his fancy while he raises his sister far away from home. And that's all the information he's willing to give away on that night. During the night, Gawain lets it be known that he interpreted Opani's interactions towards him through the previous night and this past day as a little being flirtatious, and Kita laughs, explaining to him that he's absolutely not her type, and Opani says, well, she's right, sorry if I came across as flirtatious, but I absolutely didn't mean that way. I'm into girls. So now everybody knows that she's into girls. She also ends up revealing to the group after asking through a meandering conversation about things like the spell True Resurrection or the spell Disintegrate that she personally witnessed her own mother being obliterated by the Disintegrate spell, a spell that had been about to hit her but ended up taking her mother when her mother jumped in the way of the spell. So she's suffering intense amounts of survival guilt, and she really wants to bring her mom back. Her father had claimed he didn't have the proper spells or ability to do such a thing, so supporting that she was going through this hard time, he had sent her to the school. And the rest of the group wonder if maybe there was some ulterior motive for him not bringing her mom back, but Opani just says she doesn't think so, but she doesn't know. He seemed pretty supportive of her deciding to go and do it herself. The group warns her that bringing her mom back might not be the best course of action, like a subtle dead is better type conversation, but they're not pushy about it or anything. They're just trying to gently advise her in that regard. That being said, Kita also ends up telling Opani that she's seen her father bring back people from the dead many, many times, hundreds of times even, and that makes her hope she might be able to get the King of Atlantis to help her, but Kita doesn't have any faith in that possibility and makes it clear under no uncertain terms. That conversation over with, Gawain is offered something spicy to try by Kita, and it turns out that he has no sense of taste. He claims to have no memory of ever being able to taste food or drink, and he's also unaffected by alcohol, so in spite of having had 3 or 4 drinks, he doesn't feel it. And this fascinates everyone a little bit. Opani asks him if he ever removes his helmet, since he's been in armor the whole time she's known him, and he blatantly tells her no. He admits to being covered in scars on his head that he's self-conscious of, so he prefers to keep them covered. The ladies tell him he doesn't have to be self-conscious around them, and he's free to take off his helmet, but that's his own business, so nobody's going to push him other than to leave it as an open option, and Kethar agrees that he should feel free to take it off if he wants, but he certainly doesn't have to. Opani eventually drags Kita out onto the dance floor. They talk and tease, but then on the upper deck after a perception roll, Opani spots the victim of her unadvised anger the night before, sitting in one of the boat booths attached to the docks below. She turns away, saying, "Fuck my day," and Kita asks what's wrong. When Opani points the young man out to her, they end up arguing with a little bit of heat over whether or not Opani should let her panicked regret and guilt buy this man a drink, which is her first thought. When Opani tries to purchase a drink with a note again apologizing, Kita takes the note from her and sets it on fire, insisting that it's the wrong move. Whew. Opani takes it as what she assumes to be Kita's darker, power-driven side to not wanting her to do the right thing, and she grabs the server Axel and just pays for them to bring Griffin, whose name she still doesn't know. She pays Axel to bring a fishbowl down to the group and to tell him that the person who bought the drink sends their apologies yet again. They both watch from a careful point of view as Axel delivers the drink. Kita rolls a 27 insight check at the suggestion of the DM, and he tells Kita that she gets the sense this redheaded person didn't tell their friends anything about what happened the night before, so it's very likely he probably never even reported it to the police. Kina and Apana argue again if Opani feels so damn guilty that she should just turn herself into the campus police. They have a member of their party that is a campus cop. It should be easy. She insists the victim survived. There's no body. There's no proof of harm. So she'd most likely just get some kind of a fine, but Opani really doesn't believe that for a second. They might be revealing Kita's intense privilege or naivete. She's not sure, but she definitely doesn't think that turning herself in is going to help anybody, and she's scared shitless to do that. Since Gowan and Keithar had been getting up from the table in order to finish paying and getting ready to go home for the night, Keithar overhears the mention of them having a security guard, campus cop in their party, and asks them what the hell they're talking about. And Kita spills all the beans against Opani's wishes. He's immediately in a little shock, because if he had been worried about anyone in the group, it would have been Kita. But now he knows a member of his party just randomly lashed out and killed somebody in spite of their instant regret and how that hadn't been their intention. You know, actions and consequences and all that. He's a little taken aback. But he decides he's probably a little too fuzzy from the alcohol and doesn't want to make a snap decision, especially since she seems so contrite. He just tells her that when he goes to work the next day, he's going to look it up and see if there was any kind of report made with the campus cops. And if there was, he will come and get her, and they will work on what to do from that point on. Because it's not exactly something he could just let slide, especially if somebody's actually made the complaint. It seems like maybe he wouldn't bother to come get her at all if there's no report, but Opani just is not convinced. Opani, thinking that her stupid mistake has possibly somehow put Keithar in a tough position and that her actions have already ruined her new group of friends, is in just all kinds of distress. Both Kita and Gowan tell Opani they're going to walk her back to her dorm. They don't really want her to have to do it alone. They don't like seeing her that upset, and they're going to walk her home. When they get there, Gowan says goodnight because he's done his due diligence, but Kita asks Opani if she would like her to stay for the night on the couch. She doesn't really want to leave Opani alone when she's so upset with herself, and she's been trying to push Opani to do what she thinks is the right thing, even if Opani doesn't agree with what the right thing is, and she's afraid her friend is going to do something really stupid and self-harming. So her concern convinces Opani to let her stay the night, and that is the end of the session. And it was so much fun, and I think next session we'll end up actually grabbing whatever plot hook is actually supposed to be getting taken up. The DM deliberately didn't put that much down in front of us in terms of plot hooks, because he already knew we wanted to work on our characters a little bit. He just didn't expect us to go that long or hard on it. So coming up is Opani's journal entry and Keithar's newest letter. I'm gonna have to be trying to come up with excuses for Keithar to write letters every single time I have a session, but hey, it just keeps me in the head of my character. It doesn't have to mean he literally sent these letters out every day, so here goes. Opani's diary entry for after she's home from the mimic attack. When the security guards were done with us at the Biblioplex, we all decided to go out for ice cream in order to reward little Shiri for her bravery and excellent skills. It turns out we were not all lucky enough to be rich in the college, it seems. I found myself offering to ask my father for one of the numerous spare swords so my comrade Gawain might put it to good use and get rid of his very worn, rusty one. After the ice cream, we all went our separate ways, and Gawain was chivalrous enough to walk me to my dorm. What have I done? I just came back to my room after restlessness carried me to the nearest club for a glass of wine looking for company. I did not find the company, but I found much worse. I really, really made a terrible mistake. Where did that spell even come from? Why am I suddenly able to do these terrible things? Is that poor soul going to tell the police? Is my father going to find out what I did? Are they going to send me home? What did I do? Why did I do it? What is wrong with me? Why did I do it? It's never going to stop, is it? I am never going to be myself again. The day of classes wasn't so bad, really. It was easy compared to other classes I've taken before. But I had to tell Kita what I'd done. I wasn't sure I could, but given what she said yesterday about her sisters, I thought perhaps she was too merciless. But then I decided mercilessness was exactly the point of view I needed in the moment. I thought about telling Gawain what I did, but then I decided he was too noble and righteous. I wasn't sure I could trust him to simply hear me out. Kita at least would understand the pure impulse I followed, even if neither of us knew where the impulse came from. My power issues were one thing, telling her one thing, but then as we were talking, Mama spoke to me in my mind. Am I going crazy? Was she talking to me from beyond? Was it important? What is happening to me? Why did I tell Kita what I'd done? We saw the man I hurt last night when we went out drinking with the others. She tried to stop me from apologizing again, and I thought for certain it was because she simply lacks this level of conscience that I seem to, but she ended up telling everyone. Keithar and Gawain know what I did. What is Keithar going to do? And why is Kahida falling asleep on my couch like a visiting sister even after what she betrayed? Why am I a little thrilled by her talking about embracing my power? Why is it that when she betrayed me and then offered to stay with me tonight just so I wouldn't have to be alone, did I accept? Keithar's letter home. Mother and Mama, I know I only just wrote you, but my new friends are getting complicated. They want to move us all in together, almost like a makeshift family. And Jiri, being the little minx she is, of course wants to go with me everywhere. She adores everyone in the group already. She even wants to go on my group jaunts. She's hoping to get into more fights. I'm torn between keeping her safe in our private spaces and letting her get her hands dirty with the complicated crew. Should I throw us back into an uncertain fire, or keep the walls up a bit longer? What do you think? Mama, I wish you were in the next room like you always used to be. You always gave such good advice. As always, take care of yourselves. Keithar.